Therefore it says, wake up, sleeper. Get up from the dead. Christ will shine on you. So be careful to live your life wisely, not foolishly. Take advantage of every opportunity because these are evil times. Because of this, don't be ignorant, but understand the Lord's will. Saints of God, my eyes have seen the glory and the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage with the grapes of wrath of storm. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I see him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dew and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Hello, my name is Brandon A.J. Davis. I am the founder of Content Writing Service and Conversation with Faith Leader. I'm going to be your host for today. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of having with me a new friend and colleague. Her name is Reverend Angela Denker. She is a pastor, she's a journalist, and she is also the author of Red State Christians. And so I'm glad to be able to have her today to have this conversation as we try to discuss race, religion, and reason. Angela, how are you?
Hi, Brandon. I'm okay in that, Sunday afternoon post-worship, just like looking forward to talking to you, though.
I'm glad to have you today. How was service today?
It was good. I actually read one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s sermons for my sermon today. So it felt,
awesome.
People received it well. So I was glad to do that.
Which sermon?
The drum major.
Drum Major Instinct. That is one of my absolute favorites.
Yes.
One of my, I can remember when I was a kid. I'm not for certain at how I came across it. It may have been something that was playing on the radio around his birthday. But I end up finding the message, recording it. And I remember listening to it like all the time and trying to recite it from memory as often as I could. One of my absolute favorite speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So I'm not going to belabor the moment. I want to get right into our questions. And our first question, what was the motivation for writing Red State Christians, understanding the people who elected Donald Trump?
Yeah, so let me give you my standard disclaimer first. When you read off that whole title, I had a little bit of a debate with my publisher when we were figuring out the subtitle. And as we continue to move into this time, even of the post-Trump presidency, I continue to believe that this is an important distinction to make. My desired subtitle for the book was really Meet the Voters Who Elected Donald Trump, because a lot of what I was doing in the book was introducing people. But I don't think, in some cases, there is no understanding, what's happening right now. And it's also maybe not my role to tell people what to understand, but I do want people to meet one another in the book. So that's my standard disclaimer. But I'll try and do a short version of, how the book came to be. In 2016, I was the pastor of community life and discipleship at a large Lutheran in name, Evangelical in style church in Yorba Linda, California, which is actually the birthplace of Richard Nixon. So Yorba Linda, very much in sort of a Nixonian mode of Orange County, very white, very conservative, very affluent, and very shaped by conservative Christianity. A lot of the kids in town went to Christian schools. There's several large Christian megachurches in town. So that was my context for the 2016 election. And I watched, not only in the lead up to the election, I sort of watched the gradual but increasingly frenzied embrace of Trump by white Christianity and by white Christian elites, especially centered in those influential Southern California churches. But then I also watched, in the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump, the fallout among people who I knew at church, the divide that began to really create a big chasm, even in the church that I served. And so the way that this book came to be is that in early 2017, May, my family and I moved from Southern California back to my hometown of Minneapolis. And in doing so, I was looking to return to having a little bit more time and space to do more of the writing that I had previously done as a journalist. And as a part of that, I pitched a book to my local Lutheran publisher called, the working title was Bibles and Boob Jobs, which was centered on Orange County Christianity and sort of how this culture of wealthy white Christianity sort of helped lead and explain the Christian rights embrace of Trump. When I approached the publisher, when they learned more about my past as a journalist, my continued work as a reporter, as well as my theological understanding as a pastor, they were the ones who actually asked me if I would consider doing a nationwide look at the Christian Trump electorate from 2016. And so in 2018, I set off on really a year of travel around the United States, talking to all sorts of different people in all sorts of different places about the 2016 election and about their faith.
So exactly how long did it take you to do the research, do the interviews, all of the traveling? How long was this?
Yeah, it took a long time. And I think too, after I've written the book and thinking about it, there really so much of my personal experiences in my life, even before the official research began. And that took the entire year of 2018 with official research trips. But so much of my life experience was preparing me for this work, whether it was working in sports writing, working with NFL players and coaches who would become some of the first sort of fissures where you start to see Trump's impact on race and Christianity, beginning with Colin Kaepernick's kneeling protests, but also my own experiences in evangelical Christianity as a teenager, as a college student, and also, my own questions about where I fit in as a Christian and where do I find breaks from the God that I was taught to believe in.
It's interesting that, when you take a look in retrospect at how this whole conversation came to be centered around the influence of evangelical Christians and being in support of Donald Trump, it kind of blows the mind. It kind of, puts you in a weird head spin or headspace trying to comprehend how any modicum of a Christian group can be in support of, let's just be safe to say, the character and the character influences of Donald John Trump.
Yeah, I mean, and that was really some of the reaction that first came out after the election. But I think, and there was always a part of me that really knew that this was not as surprising as it was first reported. And, there's so many reasons for that. And I think that one of the things that I continue learning about and I continue to grow in my understanding of is just the deeply rooted role that race has played in the evangelical and, not only just evangelical, but the white Christian embrace of Trump. And how much of that story has to do with Barack Obama's presidency.
Absolutely.
How there was some sort of assumption among so many white American Christians that it was antithetical to your faith to be an Obama supporter. And then to be a Trump supporter was, oh yeah, that's normal. That makes sense. Which if you look at the two men and their past and their families and their conduct and their own walk with God. So I think, yes, it was shocking, but at the same time, the Christian moral majority was always covering up a whole lot of indiscretions that women in the church knew about for a long time because of all the sexual misconduct, and people of color also knew about as well.
It's strange, when I think about how this election came to be, there was a lot of conversations that kind of went back and forth between groups of Christians, like you said, who struggle with the idea of supporting Barack Obama because of the media's hype of, the birther movement, the Tea Party person saying that he's not a Christian, he's a Muslim. And even though we saw the schism between he and his pastor, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, one thing we knew for certain was that he had the influence of the Christian church, specifically the Black Christian church. So if anything else, we knew that Barack Obama was not a Muslim. He was a Christian. He professed to be a Christian, but still there was a huge concern between persons who felt like supporting this man for president was, as you said, antithetical to our Christian experience. And it's the same response that I have towards conservative evangelical Christians who feel that, you know, Donald Trump represents any form of God. And even if it was about politics, I don't think the conversation would be where it is today. It's more about character, and that's not character flaws. It's just his honest character. It is how he portrays himself. It is how he talks to people. It is how he looks at, you know, the American system of values. And it puts the question out there again, how can you support a person like this and then align that person with God? So I want to ask you our second question. In your opinion, what would be your summation of thought concerning white evangelical Christians who align themselves with Donald Trump? And I want you to add in there. I was trying to read a sample of your book. It's on the way from Amazon, but I was trying to read the sample that it provided me, and I noticed that you talked about that there was conversations not just for persons who you just did not talk to persons who were supporting Donald Trump. You had conversation with people whose character and moral beliefs were akin to your own, and just this was their chosen political opinion, that Donald Trump was, you know, the best thing for the president. So help me out there.
Yeah, and I want to say real briefly before I get into this question, when we were just talking about sort of the roots of this movement and really the different ways that Christians understood their connection to President Obama versus President Trump. And it reminded me of when I was preaching at that church in Orange County, which in many ways was a wonderful congregation for me and my family, a lot of great people. But I remember one morning, it must have been late 2016. I think it was before the election. But as part of one of my sermons, you know, we're one of those larger churches. We preach with screens, all these things. And as a part of one of my sermons, I talked about Barack Obama's message after the massacre at the Black church in Charleston, South Carolina. And Barack Obama, I showed a video of him singing Amazing Grace. And it's just this incredibly moving moment. And so many people were moved by it. But I got a lot of phone calls from people at church saying, I can't believe that you showed that video. And it was so offensive to them. And so I guess I think back to that moment when now we're sitting here in 2021 and, you know, after an attempted insurrection at the Capitol by a lot of white supremacists, I think back to that moment and why it would have been so offensive to people in the church to see Barack Obama singing Amazing Grace. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but let me answer.
And I was there, by the way. Sorry to cut you off. I was there, and
you were.
It blew my mind. I was sitting up in the balcony, and I was just blown away, completely blown away, because I knew Senator Clemente Pinckney, knew him personally. I had to make the journey. Me and another fraternity brother and a colleague of mine. We drove down from Ohio the night before on a whim, got a hotel, and got up early in the morning and went to the funeral. I actually had to stand in line like several blocks away from the school gymnasium, the College of Charleston. And Lester Holt came walking by, and he was just doing random interviews and somehow turned to me and interviewed me as to why I was there. And so I shared that I knew Reverend Senator Clemente Carlos Pinckney. He was one of the recommenders for me to join my fraternity. We both are alum from Allen University. And this was something in my life that, you know, if I ever have children, I want to be able to say, in a tragic event, I was able to attend the funeral of a great human being and listen to the first African-American president do his eulogy. And never in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought this man will break out in a verse of Amazing Grace, which was electric.
Yes.
You've been in African-American worship services. it was electric. I mean, the people just really, the bishops on the council, on the day is really just, couldn't contain. Oh my God, the president of the United States of America is singing Amazing Grace. And then when the hype dissipated, the reality of who he was, the moment, and what he was singing and what he had just spoken, it just all, in a synergy-like way came together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing your story of that, because even just hearing you talk about it, I feel the power of it. And that's why I wanted to preach about it and include it, because it was such a powerful moment. And that's also been the heartbreaking thing that, I always try and say that the only saving grace of these last 4 years is it has brought so many things that were underneath the surface in America, the racism that is still so powerful in America, the hypocrisy of white Christianity. The last 4 years have made those unignorable. They've brought them to the surface, and people have no choice but to realize that they exist.
Absolutely.
But I think that as we talk about that, and I encountered, as I was doing this interviewing and traveling, people would just assume that because I was white and because I was a Christian, that it was automatically conservative. And one of the things that the assumption, even by the media, of which I have been a part and I totally support, but even the assumption that Christianity is aligned with conservatism in America, what it has done is in many ways it has erased the incredible power of the Black church, which is not politically monolithic, of course. But that's really been a disservice. So that's why I was so excited to talk to you today and to, continue to learn and grow more. So the second question that you asked me, my first reaction is, well, how much time do you have?
You're good. We normally have these conversations 45 minutes to an hour. I try to respect the guests. But there's been moments where the conversations lingered. So you're in good company, and I have several colleagues who are listening. So you're in good company.
Great. Well, hi everybody. Thanks for watching. I wish we could be together for real.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think one of my goals in my book, which diverges a little bit, of course, there's all this literature that comes out after the 2016 election. Oh my gosh, what happened? Who are these voters? And there's a lot of books that have come up, particularly about the faith angle and about Christians. And one of the things that I wanted to do was really tell a broad and complete story. So one of the things that I tried to do throughout the book is really tell some of the stories that go untold. And so I have a chapter in there about Arab American Christians in Houston and some of the ways that Middle Eastern Christians, who in 2016, many of them supported Trump because of his rhetoric about ISIS, because many of their families had been victims in the Middle East of extremist Muslim terrorism. Many of them were supportive of Trump initially, and then I was watching them sort of work through after Trump comes into office. Immediately, state puts in place the travel ban that was so discriminatory towards Arab Americans, and watching them sort of work through that. So I wanted to tell, I did not want to only focus on the stories of the Franklin Grahams and the Jerry Falwell Juniors, because I think sometimes we give those folks too much oxygen. So I wanted to really tell the stories of ordinary Christians throughout America, of rural Americans. And so I do. I talk to Christians in red states and counties, and some of them weren't Trump voters. But I also wanted to just understand and get the picture of communities where support for Trump was really high among Christians, and to understand all the different intersecting points of people that were impacted by the 2016 election. And maybe some of the evolution that had happened even by 2018 about their vote.
Absolutely. And I have my good friend and brother, Reverend Chris Stewart, who pastors in Alabama, in Birmingham, just ordered your book. So we're excited for that. Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate the help and the support here. One of the things that prompted me to get in touch with you, I was on Twitter a couple of nights ago, and I was just browsing through Twitter. I think it was the night of the riot, and I was just looking to see what was being said. And I think we're connected to a few people. One of the persons I think we're connected to is Robert Jones, author of White Too Long.
Yes.
And I've been trying to get in touch with him because I wanted to talk to him about his book.
Yeah.
Since the pandemic has started, my close-knit group of friends and colleagues, we've been doing a lot of spending on books, trying to,
Right.
fill our minds with understanding what is happening in the world today as it relates to racism and violence and Trumpism. And so if someone gets a hold of a new book, we pass it off immediately like, hey, just saw this on Amazon. It looks interesting. So, hey, let's get this. And we're having dialogue and conversation with each other. But as a result of being on Twitter that night, I saw your tweets, and I'm gonna be honest and frank. I don't think I've ever heard a white woman say the things that you said who was clergy. I've heard some outlandish and crazy stuff from people who are clergy and who profess kinship to Christ, who say they profess kinship to Christ. But as I read your statements, I was like, this is unreal. And it really, my heart went out to you, and I appreciate what you were saying. And I wanted to say, to you as a colleague and as a person of faith that your honesty is what helps to deal with the issue of racism in this country. A lot of people may disagree with me, but I do not believe that racism is an African-American person's responsibility to solve. I think racism is for white people to deal with, to address, and to admit that it exists, that it is perpetuated by rhetoric and actions. And I believe African-Americans have the fiduciary responsibility of, when it is admitted, to work with the person to bring about reconciliation, race reconciliation. But one of your tweets that you had put up really spoke to me. It was about 2:53 p.m. on the 9th. You said, "I am today honestly overwhelmed by the role white women have played and continue to play in the dehumanization of our fellow Americans. As a pastor, as a mom, I've stood in those churches. I've benefited from those systems." Can you tell me what happened there? What prompted that?
Yeah, let me go back to that place. So I am a white person who grew up in a very white community here in Minnesota. I think one of the statistically overwhelmingly whitest states in the country, and a state where we obviously have a lot of problems with race, partially due to that. But I've also always been a white person who was sort of raised to care about racism and to want to learn more about it, even as imperfectly as that has worked out. My grandfather was a Lutheran pastor who worked in Missouri during the civil rights movement and was really outspoken about race and racism, and paid for it with his job. Was kicked out of churches. And when I became a pastor, my grandpa was like, "Yeah, I'm proud of you, but I can't come to your ordination because I will never set foot in the Lutheran church again," because he felt so, because he had paid so heavily. So that's part of what I was raised with. And, even in sports, just the ways that racism operates in sports, and the ways that, in the NCAA, where you have these white coaches and white administrators who are benefiting from the unpaid labor of Black athletes. That was something that I wrote about for Sports Illustrated and cared about. But I think the insurrection at the Capitol, for whatever reason, I had never so fully connected the dots in a way, because I've also always been a feminist, and I have experienced, both as a sports writer and as a pastor, just the effects of sexism and what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated world. And so I think I had in the past been more hesitant to link the ways that white women are particularly culpable for the ongoing racism and racist policies. And I think, as I wrote, dehumanization of our fellow Americans. And so I think I was watching the insurrection, and I was watching some of these newly elected congresswomen white congresswomen, and the ways that they would be standing right up there with their white male colleagues, to object to the free and fair election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and watching them with their bodies provide support, provide cover for racist rhetoric, for injustice, and it just really, really stung in a powerful way. And it made me see too how, as mothers, and as I'm the mom of 2 white sons, of how we have for too long not held our sons accountable, and again provided cover for a system that is not working for any of us.
Gotcha. So one of the things that I really appreciate hearing you say today is rhetoric. I had a good friend of mine that I wanted to join us today, but because of I'm going to say her sensitive employment, she works for the federal government. This would not have been a good time to have this conversation because she is a rhetorician. And she's an academic rhetorician, and she's a pastor as well, chaplain and preacher. And so a lot of emphasis is being paid attention to people's Facebook accounts. Mm-hmm. And, I've dealt with the issue of being blocked on Facebook several times because of my rhetoric. And it wasn't that I was saying, kill white people. It was simply bringing attention to the racism that was wrought on the campus, on the U.S. Capitol. And as a result, somebody either flagged my comment or didn't like it, or Facebook's algorithm just, pointed it out and said, this is against community standards. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I really appreciate, as I said, is you recognizing that what took place on the U.S. Capitol was not just about racism and hate being fueled by someone contesting a fair election. It's about the use and power of rhetoric, and how rhetoric can influence people to act and to do. It's not just, a power tool to, get people to respond. It's a power tool that can be used to cause people to act and to respond to what is being said. I write for several newspapers, and one of the papers that I write for is the Christian Recorder, which is the oldest African-American newsprint media in publication in the world, owned by my denomination, the AME Church. And shout out to the Christian Recorder and General Officer John Thomas. My article is on the way. I know I'm late. But I was doing some research for that particular article, talking about the justice of God, unfinished business. And I was trying to understand something that a good friend of mine, the Reverend Matthew Johnson, said on our conversation when the riots took place, was that this isn't just an issue of social injustice. And he said, matter of fact, we need to stop saying social injustice. There's nothing social about it. It's just simply injustice. He said, but what was on display was whiteness and white privilege. And though he did not say it, my mind just started going there saying, okay, how do you differentiate between whiteness and white privilege? And so I started doing some reading. I found some stuff by, I think it's Ellie Mayer, where she's talking about W.B. Du Bois's irrationality of anti-blackness. And she pointed out a statement that a statement by W. Du Bois is that the whiteness of white people is that they feel entitled to any and everything. And then I was looking for a good working definition for white privilege. Frances Kendall, author of Diversity in the Classroom and Understanding White Privilege, Creating Pathways to Authentic Relationships Across Race. She gave a working definition. For white privilege, she said, having greater access to power and resources than people of color in the same situation do. And I looked at some more writings, and one person actually stated that it's not just white privilege. Whiteness is something that was created for 19th, 20th century low-class white Americans to give them something, as W.B. Du Bois called, compensation for their anti-blackness. But white privilege does not extend to all white people. because white privilege is a capitalistic mindset for persons who are white, who come from wealthy backgrounds like Donald Trump. And so to put it all together, I noticed that it was whiteness on display. It was white privilege. And the white privilege is disgusting because you see these senators like Ted Cruz denouncing a fair, honest, open election. Hit a riot. It incited domestic terrorism on the U.S. Capitol. And just this morning, I was listening to Manchin from West Virginia. I used to pastor in West Virginia, and I worked with him on several of his initiatives. But he stated that these elected officials need to be removed from office using the 14th Amendment because their rhetoric incited this insurrection, this seditionist act on the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear Joe Manchin say that. I of course, Ted Cruz is Ted Cruz, but I think my ire has mostly been directed and focused on Josh Hawley. So Josh Hawley and I share a connection to Missouri. My husband's from Missouri. My mom's from Missouri. I went to the University of Missouri where he worked at the law school. And I imagine, a number of my family and friends are big Josh Hawley fans in Missouri. And just the cynicism by which he's acted, and the entitlement, yes, on display, the entitlement to a book contract, the embrace. And I was watching, after the insurrection, watching the courage of many of these elected officials to come back to complete the business of the country. And then also watching these folks continue to stand up so proudly. I mean, it was almost comical if it wasn't so darn scary.
Absolutely.
To watch these folks stand up and continue to object, knowing that their objections had just led to a militant assault on the Capitol. I mean, it was horrifying to watch. But also, I think as a white Christian, it's just, I told my church the following Sunday, we can't say this is somewhere else out there, and I think that even some of the language talking about white evangelicals, I'm part of the white mainline, and we're kind of we're like the white moderates that Dr. King talks about. And, we like to think that that's somebody else, that's some other kind of Christian. That's not us. We're just, we're here, maybe a lot of them voted for Trump, but, that's not us. And I think that, again, on Wednesday, it was really a time of reckoning and self-examination, particularly for white Christians in this country, and the roles that we have played. And so I think it always begins with self-examination, and looking, at the log in your own eye before removing the speck in somebody else's. But I'm certainly looking at the speck in Josh Hawley's eye a lot over the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And so, one of the things that I paid attention to, last year we had all of these riots, right? Throughout the United States, there was riots all over the country. There was protests all over the world. Literally, George Floyd was killed by a police officer with a knee to the neck, and it ignited a worldwide protest. I mean, countries all over the world was experiencing this this phenomenon of social protest. And I began to think about what would Dr. King say. And so I was doing some research, trying to find some articles, trying to find some proof of a different rhetoric coming from King. And before I say that, one of the things that really bothers me the most is when I find both white and black people who want to ignore the reality of social injustice in America and will quote King as, I guess, a means to kind of, put down what people are protesting. And it's like, if you're going to quote King, quote all of King. Mm-hmm. And so I found an article where he talked to the American Psych Association in 1967 during the summer riots. He told them that we're now going to have to accept that rioting is a new form of social protest. And he talked about how African Americans who are doing these rioting is mainly because, one, they've never had the privilege of owning and having. And so to be able to break in and steal is not just to say I stole something, is to be able to say I now have the same privileges that white people have had all of their lives. And it's not a justification for the looting and the rioting. It's just helping people to understand where we are in a socially constructed world. And I think as culture continues to shift and as we continue to change, embracing the nuances of our intellect as it relates to racism and violence in America, we're going to have conversations like this that speak to the core issue. There's no way you can ignore what took place on the U.S. Capitol other than whiteness and white privilege. And those who are in the white privilege category use their rhetoric thinking that, okay, if I say this, then I'm not really guilty, but you are. Your words motivated them. And those who are of low class, underemployed, unemployed, undereducated, or not educated at all, they fulfilled everything you had hoped they would fulfill. I was watching Trump as he gave his speech. He gave all of the alternative facts, and it was like pouring gas on a fire. And the more he said, they stole the election. They stole the election. This isn't right. This isn't right. The more those people got mad and got angry. And then they just began to, shout out, take our country back, take our country back. And they ascended upon the U.S. Capitol with one mindset of taking their country back. And it's like, who are you really taking it back from? Because if you look at history and you look at today, you're not taking it back from us. We're still fighting unbelievably to have a say in this country. It's 2021. And two preachers, seminary trained preachers, on a Sunday afternoon when we should be eating fried chicken and drinking Kool-Aid and putting our feet up because it's a pandemic and watching whatever on TV, we're having a serious dialogue about racism and racism amongst Christians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I live about 6 miles from where George Floyd was killed. And I think,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And that, I marched with clergy here, and I attended a few, organizing sessions for helping pastors and church leaders understand how to participate in civil disobedience. And so the comments that people have made about there being any kind of analog between the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer and what happened at the Capitol, there's just zero basis for that, zero basis. And what we really found here in Minneapolis is that much of the burning and the rioting and the looting was not coming from folks who were protesting with Black Lives Matter. It was coming from people who were outside, people who just wanted to stir things up, a couple of proven white supremacists. And it's just such a false storyline that really seeks, what I notice is that it really seeks to distort the truth. There's so much fear of the truth really being heard. And I see this, even in people that I love who are just clinging to Trump, clinging to this story about the election being stolen. They would rather believe these outlandish things, QAnon, that Democratic officials are pedophiles. They would believe these outlandish things rather than just to say, you know what, I have racist thoughts and feelings. And they will do anything, go to any length not to just say that. And I think that I really believe that a lot of this stems back to the fact that here in the United States, white Americans have never had a true repentance and reckoning over slavery and the Civil War. And it's sad that all these years later, this is still happening. But without that repentance, without that reckoning, without reparations, I think we're going to continue to be tormented by this.
Absolutely. We really are. And that's one of the sad things about it, is that there's never been the conversation of let's actually sit down as a country, elected officials, sit down as a country, and let's have this conversation. And not only have the conversation, but let's do the right thing. Let's do more than say we're sorry. Let's consider putting some infrastructures in place that is going to make African Americans feel that they are contributing partners in making America what it is, instead of continuing the endless rhetoric and dialogue about how African Americans are not a part of America and how we did not have any influence in America becoming what it is today. And that brings me to our third question. What does racial reconciliation look like in 2021? And in your opinion, who does it start with? And we've already kind of had this conversation, but what does it look like in your opinion?
Yeah, I get so tired of people asking Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, well, what are you going to do to reach out to those 74 million Americans who voted for Trump? What are you going to do to reach out to them? Gosh, I did not hear anybody asking Donald Trump, well, how are you going to reach out to those Hillary Clinton voters? How are you going to really understand those women in the pussy hats? I mean, there was nothing like that. And I think that it was shortly after the election that I was watching an interview with James Clyburn, and I think he really spoke to this, and I also keep thinking about Jesus' words as he sent his disciples out 2 by 2, and he told them to go to people's homes and talk to people and wherever that they were received, to spend time and to get to know one another. But he said, when you are not received, you shake the dust off your feet. And so I think that racial reconciliation, as we have kind of talked about, it does begin within white families. It begins within white churches. It begins among white people starting to have these conversations. And I will say, when I'm trying to find some hope, there are a lot of white churches that are trying to engage in this kind of work, and really trying to ask, for, as I think you said at the beginning, Brandon, that for too long we've put the burden of racial reconciliation on Black and Brown Americans and on African Americans. And I am hopeful that there's beginning to be more teaching to white Americans, that it begins with telling our own family stories about race and not pretending that, we don't see color.
Right.
And it's hard. I mean, so my sister-in-law is Black, my brother's wife, and we were just talking, about everything that happened at the Capitol, and my brother said, and we were just talking about how, there is still so much work that needs to be done. And my brother told me that one of the first times that his wife, Bianca, then his girlfriend, came to visit, my dad was with my brother at the airport, and my dad said, well, Kevin, I don't see color, and so we're doing this work like in my own family, as I'm, expecting that my sister-in-law is expecting my new nephew, who's going to be brought up in America as a Black man, and trying to understand as a white family, like how we contemplate our own role in what my nephew is going to be facing, and how, we learn about it. So I think this is always happening on a church level, on a government level, but also it has to happen within white families. And that's where some of the work that I want to do takes place too.
Have you, I should have asked earlier. Now, are you done with your seminary journey? Do you have you have an MDiv? Am I correct?
Yep.
Do you also have the DMin?
No, I don't. Nope. Haven't gotten my demon yet. No.
Are you going for it?
No, I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place, but I don't know. I got to pay off my seminary loans first, right?
Ooh, don't even mention it. The pandemic has been a wonderful opportunity. I have several close friends who all are going back to school, and some are going to school, starting their seminary journey for the first time. And it's inspiring. And I try to be a man of my word. Any of my friends who are going back to school and going back to seminary particularly, hey, if I can help in any way, call me, because I really believe in education. I try to force education, not force. I'm in education and conversation with my nieces and nephews, and I have a lot of them. And so I try to make it a part of, the conversation that we have when we talk about, some of the things that make them happy and what they like to do and stuff. But I'm thinking that we ought to have more persons like yourself, Angela, who are, I'm an alumnus from United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. And I have one of my good classmates up here who's also an alumnus there as well. But one of the things that I think that we need is to have cohorts that address this very conversation, cohorts that are centered around this kind of conversation where we're talking about racism and whose responsibility it is to deal with racism. Now, again, I want to say Black people, African Americans, we are not without our fiduciary share of the responsibility of addressing racism. We need to do our part in having the uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had in our churches. And we have a history of preaching about racism, preaching about injustice. It's a part of our rhetoric. It's a part of our tradition. You cannot define Black preaching without talking about this aspect. And so I think we need to have some more new cohorts for seminary, and especially the new seminarians who are coming through. I'm 36 in a couple of days. And I feel like, okay, I'm finally, I know I'm an adult, but, family members have a way of making you feel like a kid.
Mm-hmm.
My parents who might be watching right now, I love you, but you make me feel, never mind. But the older I get, the more I'm realizing there are a lot of young people coming into seminary born of this generation. We don't have any more 70s and 80-year-olds, 70s and 80s babies is what I want to say.
Oh man.
Who are going to school. We have these new kids on the block,
right,
who are embracing this new culture of church,
right,
that is anti anything that looks like tradition, or that makes a person feel like they have to do and say what is appropriate. And so I think we need to have, those kind of persons to come in and to create these new cohorts that are designed to have these conversations. So let's talk about the distinction between national pride and Christian identity and the Trumpian effect it has on the gospel message. And this is something that you kind of lift up in your book as well.
Yeah. So my first chapter of the book is all about Christian nationalism. And again, as I've continued to study these topics and I've watched the Trump presidency evolve, even since the publishing of my book, when I talk about Christian nationalism, I've become increasingly convinced that every time that I say Christian nationalism, or every time I say that Jesus is an American, how deeply these are tied to race and how deeply these are tied to whiteness, and that Christian nationalism is intrinsically connected to white nationalism and to white privilege. So in the first chapter of the book, I spent 4th of July weekend in Dallas, Texas at Prestonwood Baptist Church in Plano, Texas, as well as First Baptist Dallas. So Prestonwood Baptist Church, Jack Graham is the pastor there. Been a close, confidant supporter of Trump, was initially a Cruz supporter and jumped over to Trump when it looked like Trump was going to get the nomination. But watching this service, and the whole first chapter of the book sort of unpacks this and also the larger impact, because I found Christian nationalism to be operating almost everywhere I went. It wasn't just in Dallas. It wasn't just in the Deep South. It was in California. It was in New Hampshire in Catholic churches. But it was so flagrant at these mega churches where, the whole worship space is red, white, and blue, and you're watching video montages of the American military that's sort of being conflated with military sacrifice, Jesus' sacrifice, and the cross, that these are two sides of the same coin. People are saying the Pledge of Allegiance in church. And so what has happened for a lot of American Christians is, and this began in a lot of white churches after World War II, that there was this increased responsibility of churches to distinguish between the atheist communists in the Soviet Union and the democratic Christians in America. But then that teaching begins to take a left turn, goes through 9/11, becomes directed towards anti-Muslims. And then in the presidency of Barack Obama, that Christian nationalism is increasingly directed against the political left, against people of color, and against immigrants. And so what you begin to see is that people in their heads begin to almost subconsciously see their Christian faith as connected to being a patriot, as connected to supporting the military, supporting the police. They begin to see Jesus, and my friend and writing colleague, Kristen Covas-Dumais, I always say her last name wrong, she's written Jesus and John Wayne, which she just is an incredible book that talks about this. But that Jesus becomes an American political figure, and this montage of the strong white man, you think of pastors like Mark Driscoll, even, other famous pastors who aren't as politically conservative. There's this idea of Jesus as the white American superhero. And lost is any sort of teaching about who Jesus really was, that Jesus was not white, that Jesus was not American, that Jesus was a refugee, that Jesus was executed by the government because he was seen as such a threat. And it becomes an idolatrous religion of its own. And you see that Trump really latches onto that kind of rhetoric when he talks about America first, when he talks about, my generals, the military, the police. He doesn't say anything about Jesus. But for those who have been taught and schooled in these churches where 4th of July, Veterans Day, September 11th are all bigger church holidays than Easter, Christmas, they think, hey, that's our Christian president, because Christianity has been divorced from Jesus himself.
And it's strange, right? It's strange how, we develop these ideas where, we try to put a monopoly on Christ and a monopoly on religion so that it is tailored to our human perspective instead of us tailoring our human perspective to religion and Christ. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing because this is another form of rhetoric. It's another form of insurrection where, as you said, Donald Trump latches on to this idea that, hey, because I know that there are Christians, evangelical Christians altogether who think that, the American way of life is the God ordained plan for all people, particularly white people. I'm gonna align myself with the thought of, hey, since you guys have already dismissed Jesus yourself, I'm just going to come out and tweet and say, hey, listen, I've done more for African Americans than Jesus Christ. And people are not even seeing the correlation. They're not even seeing that through their chosen act of support for, their political beliefs and their American value systems, that you have dismissed Jesus. After you've already Americanized Jesus, you've dismissed Jesus now, and you have erected this new Jesus, which is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump comes in, slaps your savior around, and says, I've done more than Jesus Christ himself. And it's like, what a dangerous commodity it is to be that naive and foolish into thinking that you can so easily make Jesus that small.
And the theological roots of this run so deep. If you look at popular American Christianity, even the kind of Christianity espoused by folks who are seen as more apolitical, such as Rick Warren, such as Bill Hybels, there has been there's been a personalization of the gospel that says, it's me and Jesus is in my heart, and Jesus is all about saving me in my personal life, and me and Jesus, we're going to ride off into the sunset together. And it's been totally divorced by any sort of larger global mission of salvation for humanity, for creation, for the earth, thinking about things like care for the earth. And because of those theological commitments, and by understanding Jesus' death on the cross strictly as a personal salvation, we've heard this kind of rhetoric, accept Jesus into your heart as your personal savior. That kind of rhetoric has made American Christianity very susceptible to being hijacked, to have nothing to do with the larger Christian causes that have been also a part of Christianity since the time of Jesus. And it's made it very susceptible to a self-aggrandizing type of faith.
Absolutely, and that's one of my favorite words, self-aggrandizing. I love it. It's scary that this is where we are, and that we're now having to redefine what religion is, and what salvation is, and what faith looks like, because of the dangers of the influence of personal thought, racism, infiltrating what the gospel message is supposed to be. And I think that, and I think I'm going to have a little fun with this come Easter time. And I've shied away from the rhetoric about what really happened to Jesus, because I didn't want to touch it. I wanted to leave that sacred aspect alone. But in dissecting the crucifixion, on both sides, we have to accept the reality that it was a lynching, and it was capital punishment forced by the government. This was not something as beautiful as the crucifixion is in terms of saving souls. As beautiful as the resurrection is in the sustaining of our faith, and what makes us, as the hymn says, holy thine. It's so much ugly about the crucifixion, and I'm concerned with persons' engagement with Christ, and their engagement with their fellow man, their fellow sister. If we're going to make it in 2021, we're going to have to make it together. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, and I want to thank you for your book, and I can't wait to read all of it. I'm just one of those old school people where I like to feel a book in my hand, and the Kindle stuff just, it in a pinch, okay. But if I can get the book, I want the book, because I want to dog ear the pages. Not really, but I do. And I want to get my fountain pen, and I want to get in the margins, and I want to start writing notes, and I want to underline stuff, because when I'm writing, especially when I'm stumped, it helps me to produce good thoughts. So, Angela, I really appreciate you, and I want to thank you again for being with me. I ask everyone this question using the context of our conversation: define unholy silence.
Yeah, I mean, I think unholy silence is what happened at a lot of white churches, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, not today, but last Sunday, and after the Capitol insurrection. And there's a really beautiful piece of writing, maybe not beautiful, but very poignant piece of writing by the writer Liz Lenz. And she writes about going back home to her childhood church in Iowa after the Capitol insurrection. And, the pastor begins the service and says, well, it's been a crazy week for everybody, hasn't it? And he kind of laughed, and everybody laughed, and that was it. And I think that that's what happened at a lot of churches this past Sunday, particularly white congregations. And she actually wrote about it as the violence of white silence. And I think that unholy silence too is, for too much time. And I think that this is part of my reflection and thinking on the role that white women have played in a kind of militaristic white Christianity that has often abused white women as well. Too many times we've made these calculations in our heads and thought, is it going to be worth it, or is it going to be more beneficial to get along, to go along, to sort of pick and choose the places where I'm going to speak the truth? And I think that I have really felt personally God calling me to be less timid, to be less kind of constantly weighing what I'm going to say and wondering what the white men in power are going to think about it. So I think that unholy silence is the silence that calculates truth against personal gain, that calculates truth against comfort. And, trying to move out of that place of comfort and into a place of truth.
Absolutely. Again, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I can only imagine what you have to deal with on a regular basis. You're a pastor, you're a wife, you're a mom of 2 young kids, and you're a journalist, you're a writer. and you're a thinking person concerned about what's happening within our country. And so, Angela, I really appreciate you being so willing and kind to speak with me today. And I look forward to dialoguing with you more. And I hope that your schedule would allow you to come back because I want to continue this style of conversation when Reverend Moore is able to join us. And so I really, really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. I hope that you are able to have, a little time for reflection and rest tomorrow on the holiday. And I'm grateful to everybody who was watching too. I'm glad to be connected.
Thank you so very much. As always, it is a blessing to be able to have these conversations and to be able to join in with persons like Reverend Angela Denker for joining with us to talk about the conversations that need to be had within our communities and within our country. The only way we're going to be able to solve the issues of racism and to address the nuances of racism in light of Christianity and the Christological view of the church is to be able to sit down with people and to talk about it. And so I want to thank all of you for being a part of today's conversation. I want to thank you for showing up today on YouTube. We had some difficulty in getting everything onto Facebook, but that will be rectified in the future. Let's pray. And so I want to encourage you to continue to view this broadcast and to share it amongst your friends and to have conversations amongst your family and colleagues as it relates to the church's response to racism and to the racism of our country, and to create some solutions that can be used within your community. You may not be able to reach the entire world, but you do have the opportunity of reaching the world that exists around you. One of the bishops of the AME Church, a mentor and friend of mine, the late Bishop C. Garnet Henning, once said to me that it is important that you influence the world that exists around you. God calls us to preach the gospel to the world, and often we think the world is on a large, grand scale. It's not. The world exists in your community. It exists in your school system where you live. It exists in the grocery stores where you shop. It exists in the communities of leisure that you partake of. And so I encourage all of you to have these conversations, to talk about the ugliness of racism and the contributing of persons who profess kinship to Christ, who harbor and have racist thoughts and tendencies. We can solve it. We can address it. We can do it. God can help. Again, my name is Brandon Davis. I'm the founder of Content Writing Service and the host of Conversation with Faith Leaders. And I look forward to seeing you again on next Sunday.